Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you so much for being here. I'm so pleased to speak to you today about my research and experience in historic house museums. I will argue that historic houses can be important sites for community engagement and public service. I see the ways that their missions can be tied to diversity and inclusion objectives, and that when we are open to the change that is possible, historic sites can reflect critically on their histories and present place in society. I also recognize the value of preserving these architectural structures and extensively designed gardens, like the one you see here, Filoli Historic House and Garden, which is just a bit south of CCA's campuses in San Mateo County. Such designed natural spaces and grand buildings can be reimagined and repurposed to fit revised 21st century institutional missions that are tied to social good. However, this work can only be done through both internal and systemic change. For the last 3 years, I have worked at Filoli, and my experience there has shaped my thinking and informed my optimism about the future of historic house museums. You might be asking what a historic house museum is, and to put it simply, they're what they sound like. It's a house, and often the surrounding property where people once lived, that has been turned into a museum. Their collections might be original to the founders of the home or entirely imagined by a curator who does their best to simulate the original furnishings. There is often a mix of both. They are usually preserved for having housed some important historical figure who is usually a wealthy white man, or because they are examples of architectural grandeur. In a study by the American Alliance of Museums in 2019, there were over 15,000 historic house museums in the United States alone, and many had less than 5 people on staff without the ability or need to expand due to both weak funding and visitation. Filoli was established in 1917 by William Bourne, a wealthy gold baron, entrepreneur, and socialite who built this 54,000 square foot Georgian-style mansion on his, at the time, newly acquired 701-acre estate. It was a respite outside of San Francisco where he could escape the hustle and bustle of city life, and where the Bournes dreamt they could grow young. This was surely felt in the years following its inception, when the Spanish flu pandemic made crowded areas like San Francisco unsafe. Filoli was a place to escape from others. And as public institutions, the missions of historic house museums now are quite the opposite. We want to bring people in, and we're finding that the current framework through which many historic houses present history just doesn't work with contemporary expectations. Museum visitors, generally speaking, are looking to interact with the space, to understand the so what of history. Visitors, of course, want to feel welcomed and understood. We're currently looking at Anarchist Tags. These tools used to rethink historic house museums were designed by Frank Vagnone, author of the Anarchist Guide to Historic House Museums. The tags would be given to visitors on both guided and unguided tours for them to place on objects, door handles, furniture, and the like to share their thoughts and impressions. They were a first for many house museums in actually opening up and listening to their communities by asking a simple question: what do you think? The answers can be grounding anchors in how we allow our community to take ownership of such historic sites and museums, and how we begin to create internal change. We understand that the format of historic house museums does not necessarily need to be destroyed, but perhaps deconstructed and reconstructed in order for us to find a better delivery system. And listening is a key part of finding that system. At Hempstead House in Connecticut, pictured here, an 8-week teenage-led summer program was developed to reimagine the museum and how it could bring its community together. The teens were asked to revise the historic site in a way they thought would be compelling to their friends and family, all while receiving training on historical interpretation, art and collections handling, and professional practices. This was an essential action taken by Hempstead House, which at the time was a site struggling with a disconnect from their neighbors and grappling with interpreting difficult histories of slavery and race. The program ended with an open house where the teens shared their findings and research in audience engagement. All of this has been documented on the blog, Finding Community, Engaging Diverse Audiences in Historic House Museums. Hempstead made several important conclusions: that the teens wanted to remain in control of their experiences. Guided tours where they were lectured at were universally disliked. They wanted an immersive and multi-sensory experience, one where they could explore and feel unbound by rules or etiquette. And though both of these methodological themes were important, even they were worthless without these content-driven themes. Emotional connections, authenticity which connects people to place. This includes difficult or messy histories. Relevance, connecting to modern times and daily life. And meaning, a malleable framework which can be made different for every visitor. Along with this program, Hempstead held workshops with community members and staff for more organized conversations about race and equity in rural Connecticut, a region saturated with racial tension due to the lasting effects of segregation. Still, like many cities and towns in the United States, there is a clear line between Black, brown, and white neighborhoods, and a lack of equity in the distribution of resources and wealth that is not incidental. This was an issue that needed to be addressed in order for Hempstead House to connect with its community. At Filoli, I have worked directly with visitors and have seen our efforts of inclusion change the site. Here, I'm showing an historical photo of the pool pavilion next to a contemporary photo of Pride Week in 2019, where public programs like the drag show have cut away at some of the mystique from a historic and grand site like Filoli, where architecture and objects can take a backseat to the community who is placed at its center. In this regard, the people at our site begin to inform its meanings. And with that groundwork set, we're able to ask more specific questions. If our interpretation of history is alienating, does it make visitors feel overwhelmed or patronized? Are the stories told a sterilized version of history, which prioritizes legacy over critical reflection? And is the organization centering objects and preservation over people? And then we can dig deeper. Do our visitors feel a sense of welcome and belonging? Do they feel valued? Do they see themselves represented and reflected in the museum? Do they feel connected to the stories of others at the museum? And do they feel connected with the people they may be encountering at the museum, including staff? Articulating these questions is the first step, and it's no easy feat. But measuring the solutions is what people need. It gives agency to our words and makes statements more than just statements. This is a brave new world that has only been dented into, but I believe the first step is having these conversations so that we can work together to bring people in. With that, being at the museum becomes more than just the history of the family that once lived there, more than objects or furniture, or even the house itself. Instead, it's about the museum becoming a place for people to come together and connect with each other, with their own histories and environment. We hope that we can do this through our programming by letting those histories be both discussed and contested. In 2020, Filoli commissioned the artist Christine Mays, a Black woman and native San Franciscan, to create a series of sculptures for the garden. Her work in the exhibit Rich Soil, inspired by the movement of Alvin Ailey's dance composition, Revelations, pays honors to the ancestors, those that walked on, lived on, and tended to this land, to the lives that have been recognized and those that have been forgotten. As we all witnessed long festering calls for racial justice surface across the country, The exhibit occupied the garden and brought this urgent cause to material form. May's ability to scale up the work created monumental forms, which we can see through and between, allowing us to view her installation as it interplays with the grounds, where the formal English and Georgian style might signify white supremacy. Following a year of unprecedented hardship, I have emerged with renewed assurance of the importance of places like Filoli, which our Director of Horticulture stated just over a year ago, are champions of environmental education and conservation, yes, but we also provide substance for people's souls. We can imagine a space where the walls might symbolically or even physically open up to invite people in, to dance, discover, and connect with each other and the world around them. We are already committing a radical act to invite people into these once private spaces, and we shouldn't forget that. I believe in our ability to tie our missions to diversity and inclusion when our external work is grounded in the work we do internally, where we can create a culture of cohesion and solidarity within our organizations and outside of them. When we do this, museums can take on the role of a civic anchor for our communities, one where we build trust and understanding between each other and our neighbors. And here we are, in the time of a pandemic, not the first of Filoli's lifetime. And we are opening the museum to a wider and greater public by making a necessary pivot, one where we begin to see ourselves as an indispensable part of that public. During a time when we are further politically, socially, and economically polarized each day, I believe that history can ground us. That first step is to invite people in. The home offers this space. Thank you.